everybody, Dan Bailey here with another mildly entertaining and hopefully wildly useful Fujifilm video for you. Last video I talked about lenses, and specifically the 3 lenses that currently live in my camera bag. And got quite a few comments on that, so thanks for that. A number of people asked about the 14mm f2.8. And I didn't mention that one in the video, but that's actually my favorite wide-angle lens for the Fujifilm system. It's one of the first X Series lenses I ever got, and it's an absolute winner. Optically, it's incredibly sharp, no distortion. It's not the wide-angle lens that lives in my camera bag all the time, but I do take it with me quite often. I actually did a whole review on my channel of the 14. You can find it right here. Today I'm going to give you 10 X Series camera tips. These are 10 essential tips or functions or modes, 10 little noteworthy tidbits, because I think they can help you become a more efficient shooter when you're out in the world. Before we get started though, I want to tell you guys about my online course, Mastering the Fujifilm Autofocus System. Now, on the World Wide Web, there's apparently a few people that think that the Fuji system isn't good enough for shooting action and birds and things like that. But that's kind of funny because I've been shooting that stuff for well over a decade with the X Series cameras, and I've gotten excellent results, which leads me to believe that practice and knowing the system and knowing how to optimize it for the subjects that you like to shoot is the path towards success with any camera, and especially with the X Series if that's what you use. So my course features 20 lessons, 2 hours of content over 10 different modules. I run you through all of the settings, tell you which ones are essential, how to optimize each one for the types of things you like to shoot, give you tons of photo examples. I also give you some very valuable tips that are not necessarily camera dependent, but they can really help you nail those fast subjects and prepare yourself for shooting that kind of subject matter. It's a comprehensive deep dive into the Fujifilm focus system as a whole, and a lot of people have said it's been really helpful for them, so I encourage you to check it out. You can find a link for that right here. Okay, let's get started. Let's run through these 10 tips. Number 1, formatting the card. I was shown this tip by one of the product managers a long time ago, back with the XT1, and it's been on every camera since then. So usually to format the card you have to go into the menu, let's see, menu, go down to wrench, then user settings, scroll over format. Yeah, so the easier way to do that is to press and hold the trash button and then press the rear command dial, and there you go. You can see that menu came up. You can choose which card to format, and there you go. So again, press and hold the trash. While you're doing that, press and hold the rear command dial, and that format dialog should come right up. Number 2, when you're reviewing images, when you're playing back the photos you shot, you can press the joystick to zoom to full screen. Or you can press the rear command dial, it does the same thing. Now either way, once it's zoomed in, you can use the joystick to scroll back and forth around the image, and you can use the rear command dial to zoom in and out of the image. So that's the way to check for sharpness in your images. Take a photo, you're not sure if it's sharp or not, you zoom right in, and the cool thing is when you do press the joystick or the rear command dial, it'll actually zoom in to the area that was in focus, where the little focus box was centered on. So you can instantly check for sharpness. Here's another tip that's included in tip number 2, so it's like 2A. When you're shooting raw only in the camera, what you see on the screen is only a medium-sized preview of your image. So you can't actually zoom in all of the way to 100% and see the full-size image. So you may not actually get an accurate view of sharpness if there's some real critical focus stuff that's going on. So for this reason, if I'm shooting RAW, I'm always shooting RAW plus JPEG, and the JPEG is set to the large size. And so this allows you to shoot a RAW photo, and then what you see on the screen is actually the JPEG preview of the RAW. And even if you don't use that JPEG later on in your processing, you can still check for sharpness more accurately with that full-size JPEG preview. If you are a RAW shooter and you don't have any use for the Fuji JPEGs, I would still recommend shooting RAW plus JPEG in the camera because you'll have that ability to zoom to 100% to check your critical sharpness. Because the last thing you want to do is shoot a killer photo, think it's sharp, and then go home and bring it up on the screen. And it turns out it's not as sharp as you thought it was when you were there on location. Number 3, the function buttons. All of the current X Series models, and even those a couple generations past, have at least 10 or 12 different buttons and swipe gestures on the screen that you can customize and set how you wish. There are a couple models that don't have quite as many, but for the most part you have, I think, at least 8 or 10 for every model, if not more. And the number of options is staggering. On the X-T5, the list of functions that can be assigned to a button or a swipe gesture is over 75 different items. So there's a huge range of controls and settings that you can assign and have those right at your fingertips. And the way to do this is simply to press and hold the display back button until the function button assignment menu pops up. And then you simply look at the screen, choose whichever button you want, and then scroll through the menu and choose whichever function you want assigned to that button. And as I said, you also have swipe gestures. And if you enable the touch screen on your camera, you have 4 additional swipes. You can go left, right, up, and down. Here, I'll show you how these work. Up, histogram for me. Down, choose custom setting. Left brings up the AFC custom settings menu, and right enables pre-shot ES. So that's how I have my X-T5 currently set up. I also have my AEL button here set up as a second playback button. So if I'm shooting one-handed, like I'm riding a bike or something, and I take a photo, I can review it by simply pressing that button with my thumb. Otherwise, I'd have to take my other hand off the bar and reach over, and anytime you're riding a bike and you take both hands on the bars and you're trying to do something else, especially on a trail, you're asking for trouble. So yeah, I've set my AEL button as a second playback button. Now, if you followed me for quite a while, you know I prefer to shoot mostly JPEGs. Like, I didn't get the memo that we should all shoot RAW. Actually, I did get the memo because I used to write that on my blog. You should always shoot RAW. But after a few years with the X series, I ditched that idea, and now I just shoot JPEGs because, well, they look awesome. And I treat it like film. I like to shoot for the moment, capture a scene as I see it on location, and walk away with a finished image. And that's not to say that I might do a little bit of processing later on and tweak my JPEGs, to bring out the best of the image. But for the most part, I'm a JPEG shooter. However, there are times when I shoot RAW. And so I've set the top button here to be RAW. So when I'm shooting JPEG and I press that button, the next frame will be RAW. Actually be RAW plus JPEG for the reason I talked about earlier. Take the photo, goes back to JPEG. And I'll use that occasionally. Again, if I'm shooting a scene that I think I want to process later, or that I know has way too much contrast for the JPEG, I can hit that and the next frame will be RAW. Obviously, there are times where I might want to shoot more RAW frames instead of just the one. So that's when I'll go into the Q menu and just choose RAW, or RAW plus JPEG. And then the camera will be set up that way until I go back and change it. And now that we're talking about the Q menu, if you press and hold the Q button, you can bring up this assignment window where you can totally rearrange all of the items in your Q menu. For every one of these 15 assignable slots, you can choose from any number of functions and arrange them however you want in the Q menu. So yet another way to customize the cameras to your own style and your own preferences. Electronic shutter. So on my X-T5, I have the AF on button set for shutter type. And I can quickly go down and choose electronic shutter. Now, if you've never shot with the electronic shutter, it has some real benefits. Number one, it's silent. You might have to go into the sound settings to turn off the sound for the electronic shutter, but once you do that, it's perfectly silent. So if you're shooting inside, in a vent, anywhere where you don't want any camera noise, then electronic shutter is going to be your friend because it doesn't make any noise, perfectly silent. Another huge benefit to the electronic shutter is that you can get extremely fast shutter speeds. On the current 5th gen models, the electronic shutter tops out at 180,000th of a second. I'll say that again, 180,000th of a second. That's 1/180 with 3 zeros behind it. That's wicked fast. That is just unbelievably fast. So imagine the dynamic action that you could freeze and the instance you could preserve with a shutter speed as fast as that. So while we're on the subject, let's actually talk about how mirrorless camera shutters work. So on a DSLR, the shutter is always closed. And in front of the shutter, you have that slanted mirror, and then you have a pentaprism, which is where the viewfinder is. So when you look through the viewfinder, the light bounces down, hits that mirror, and goes out the lens. And it's actually the other way around. Light comes into the lens, bounces off the mirror, comes into your eye. So that's how you can see what's going on through the lens. And then when you take the photo, you press the shutter button, the mirror pops up, shutter opens, and then shutter closes. When the exposure is done, mirror pops back down. With mirrorless cameras, the shutter is always open. So when I take the lens off, there's the sensor. That's the sensor inside there. And that's because when you're looking at the screen or through the viewfinder, you're seeing an exact feed that's drawn from the sensor. I mean, it's exact electronic feed directly off the sensor. So that's why mirrorless cameras have the what you see is what you get factor. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this video, because there's an aspect of that that's vastly important to using mirrorless cameras. But anyway, back to shutters. So how they work. So when you're looking through the camera, whether it's looking at the LCD screen or the electronic viewfinder, you're seeing the scene just as the sensor is going to see it. When you press the shutter button, the shutter closes, the sensor turns on, then the shutter opens for however long it's set for, then it closes, then the sensor turns off. So again, shutter's open, sensor's off. Press the button, shutter closes, sensor on, exposure, sensor back off. So it's backwards, but that's just the way mechanically it has to work. So that's what happens when you use the mechanical shutter on a mirrorless camera. If you choose electronic shutter, the shutter just stays open and the sensor just turns on and off. However, it doesn't exactly work like that. What happens is it does this whole read thing, and it reads each pixel at a time all the way across the shutter. And it happens very quickly, and the newer cameras are even way faster than the older cameras. However, there are problems with an electronic shutter when you have this read rate that goes all the way across, because the time it takes for the sensor to read this pixel and this pixel on the other corner, there's still time elapsed. So if you have flickering lights, like fluorescent lights, or if you have extremely fast motion, like the motion of a guitar string or a propeller, or even some kind of, the spokes on a bike that's racing by, you'll get some weird distortion. And sometimes it looks okay, but sometimes it just looks a little bit wrong. It's just not right. And what's going on is the motion itself is faster than the read rates. So by the time the sensor is reading this thing that's moving, the thing is moved before the image has been fully captured. Now, it won't be very much longer before we have what are called global shutters, and those eventually will be standard in all cameras. But up to this point, that technology has been developing, and it's been too cost prohibitive to put inside a camera. And a global shutter is basically, you press the button, all the pixels turn on and off, all at once. So that will reduce any kind of banding or distortion. We don't have them yet, but they're coming. That said, I've been shooting action with the electronic shutters on the Fujis for a very long time, and the modern cameras of new 5th gen models, and even before that, the X-T3 had a very fast electronic shutter compared to the X-T2. And so pretty much from the X-T3 on, I haven't worried about shooting action with the electronic shutter. Now obviously something like an airplane propeller or flickering lights or the vibration of a guitar string, that has the potential to look a little weird. But for practical purposes, I think most things that you shoot with the electronic shutter, you won't have any problems. There is another electronic shutter option that Fuji gives you, and that's called electronic front curtain shutter. And you'll see this right below the electronic shutter option. It's called EF. And this allows the camera to use a combination of electronic and mechanical shutters. So the electronic shutter is used to begin the exposure, and then the mechanical shutter closes to end the exposure. And this can help prevent those distortion and banding effects. Another huge advantage of the electronic shutter is that there's no camera shake, which can be critical at lower shutter speeds, because you don't have the mechanical shutter slamming open and closed every time you take a picture. So electronic shutter is great for very slow shutter speeds. Cameras on the tripod, you want to absolutely minimize all chances for camera shake. And since the EF shutter, the electronic front curtain shutter, begins the exposure electronically and finishes mechanically, that also reduces any chance of camera shake, because when the shutter slams closed, the exposure is done. With a mechanical shutter, camera shake is more apt to happen when the shutter opens, because you have that movement right before the image is starting to be captured. So the electronic front curtain starts electronically, ends mechanically, and that reduces camera shake. Drop my camera there. Okay, number 5. Are we on number 5? Yeah, number 5. Back button focus. I'm just going to come right out and say it. I'm not a back button focus guy, and I don't recommend it, especially to new photographers. I think there's a lot of people out there who think they should use back button focus because there's some pros who use it and make everyone think they should use it. but I've always been extremely happy with finger-controlled shutter and focus. And I just don't see the advantage of trying to add your thumb into the mix. You're like, okay, I got this finger here, this thumb there, how's that gonna work? Okay, wait. That just seems awkward to me, especially if you're starting out, if you're new to photography. However, I know a lot of you guys like back button focus, so I'm gonna tell you how to do it on the X Series cameras. It's pretty easy. You go into your function button menu, remember, press the display back button, hold that down till you get the menu that comes up. Then you can assign your AF on button to be focus. And it might even be set as the default. You can go in there and check. I don't know because I instantly changed mine to shutter type. But anyway, you can set AF on or AFL because those are both pretty close to your thumb right there. So either of those two buttons you can set to AF on. So that enables focus when you press that button. Next, you'll want to decouple focus from the shutter button. Because if you're using back button focus, you obviously don't want focus to be activated here anymore. So for that, you go into the wrench menu, to the button dial settings, and one page down you'll see a menu item called Shutter AF. And when you scroll over, you'll have two headings for AFS and AFC. Turn those both off, and that will decouple focus from the shutter button. So now that you have that set up, you can activate focus with that back button, and then you can still activate exposure and shutter with the shutter button. Now, there is another option. The new long lenses from Fujifilm, the 150 to 600 and the new 500 millimeter lens, both have full rubberized buttons on the lens barrel. And there's a switch on the lens that allows you to assign those to be AF on. So that, instead of back button focus, that essentially gives you left-hand focus. And I actually think that makes much more sense. And I think it's easier to manipulate too, especially if you're not used to doing this. Because you're shooting, your focus is here, whether it's a finger or a thumb activated, and shutter's here. So you can be looking through the lens and operate focus and shutter, focus, shutter. Again, I think, but when you use two hands versus two fingers on the same hand, it's much easier to handle, and it actually works really well. I've shot birds in action with the 150 to 600 using those focus buttons on the lens. I think it works great. So if you have one of those lenses, I encourage you to try that out. Number 6, T mode. So if your X Series camera has a shutter speed dial, you can rotate that until you hit T. And that allows you to select your shutter speed with the rear command dial, and possibly the front, depending on how your camera is configured. But on the X-T5, default to the rear command dial. In addition, it allows you to scroll through all of the speeds in increments of third stops. So if on the dial, you only have 60, 125, 250, 500, 1000, and so forth. Those are full stops. In T mode, using the dial, you can get third stop increments. And you can shoot long exposures, like 10 seconds, 30 seconds. On most of the recent X Series cameras, you can shoot long exposures of up to 15 minutes. 15 minutes! That's a long time. So again, imagine the creative options that you could have with extremely long shutter speeds from 30 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. Star trails, shooting the Milky Way, Northern Lights maybe, traffic lights in the city, rushing water, waterfalls and stuff. So you can break out your neutral density filters and have a lot of fun. So if you like to shoot manual exposure, that's the way to do it. Shutter speed dial in T mode, then you've got shutter speed and the aperture ring to control your aperture. Just like the old days. Number 7 is screen settings, specifically display custom setting. So if you go into the wrench menu and find screen settings, and then scroll down, it's a few pages down, you'll see a setting called display custom setting. And when you select this, it gives you the option to fully customize what you see in the viewfinder. So all this stuff here, like this level and these icons here and the shutter speed, you can customize and have anything you want in the viewfinder, or nothing. So on my X-T5, I've got a framing level, for those times where I can't stand up straight, histogram, all my shooting data, autofocus setting, shooting mode, f-stop, shutter speed, battery level, frames remaining, time remaining in video, and my exposure compensation over here. You actually have 5 pages of stuff that you can check and uncheck for what you want to see in the viewfinder. And while we're on the subject of the viewfinder, if you're looking through the viewfinder or looking at the LCD screen and you hit display back you can toggle through the different views that you have. So for example, when I'm looking through the LCD, you have 3 different screens to choose from. I've got all my shooting data. If I press it again, all that stuff is gone and I just have a full screen image, totally distraction free. So there are times where you might not want to see all that stuff. You just want to focus on your composition and what you're actually looking at through the camera. A third option gives you all of your shooting data. No picture, but it's a quick reference for how the camera is set up. All your shooting data, time remaining, battery level, and all of the camera controls, or all of the creative controls that are found in the image quality menu and some of the focus stuff, like dynamic range, white balance, film sim, grain setting, color chrome on or off, clarity setting, and what focus and exposure mode you're using. If you're looking through the electronic viewfinder, you have 2 choices. You either have a full screen image with all of your shooting data overlaid at the edges of the image, or if you press the display back, you toggle to a smaller size image which gives you black bars at either side, and all your shooting data is inside that black area and not overlaid on the image. Number 8, you can make your own film sim recipes. Now, I know a lot of you guys probably already do this, and if you checked out Richie's Fuji X Weekly site, I mean, his whole site is geared towards Fujifilm film sim recipes. I actually brought Richie onto the channel for an interview last year. You can find the link to that here. We had a really great conversation, but definitely worth checking out Richie's site. There's a couple ways you can do this. On all of the cameras, you can go into the Edit Save Custom Settings menu, which is found inside the Image Quality menu, and you can set up any one of the 7 slots, your C1 through 7 slots, as you can currently have the camera configured, or you can go through and choose how you want each of those settings to be, and then save that to one of the slots. And you can set up any one of the 7 slots, your C1 through 7 slots, which might comprise of a specific film sim, and then make some adjustments to things like white balance, highlight shadow tone, maybe grain setting, clarity, color chrome effect, any one of those settings. So you can save those to your custom setting. Then when you bring up that slot, all of that will be preserved. If you have one of the cameras that has a dedicated film simulation dial, like the new XT50, and the XE5 has that as well, you'll see that that dial has 3 user settings. They're called FS1, 2, and 3. And again, you can access and save and change those inside the Edit Save Custom Settings menu that I just talked about. So you could save those FS1, 2, 3 slots to any kind of recipe you want, whatever you create. And of course, there's numerous ways to access the C1 through 7 settings. So if you have a camera like the XH2 or XH2S, you'll actually have the mode dial with the C1 through 7 slots right on there. You just turn the dial to whatever slot you want to use, and it's loaded up. With the XT5 and some of the other models, you can access your custom settings in the Q menu. So the top left is always your shooting mode. And as I showed you, I have my down swipe function control set up for select custom setting. On the XT5 and a couple of other models, you actually have a function control setting called Recall C1 setting. So you could create a dedicated film sim recipe or just set up your camera in any way you want. I actually have mine set up for kind of action. And so I've configured the down button to be Recall C1 setting. So when I press this down button, it instantly toggles back and forth between current camera state and my whatever's set to my C1 setting. So that's a really cool way to instantly recall a favorite setting. Number 9, photometry, which is kind of a fancy word for exposure metering. So the X Series cameras have 3 different metering patterns. You have multi-pattern, center weighted, and spot. And those are all really useful, except I don't use any of them. This is that thing I told you I was going to talk about later. So the nice thing with mirrorless cameras, since you're looking at a direct feed on the sensor when you look through the viewfinder or on the screen, you're basically seeing exactly what the picture is going to look like before you take the shot. There's no mystery. There's no more, oh, I'm going to take this picture. Oh, it didn't look like anything like I thought it was going to look like. Oh, what did I do wrong? What you see on the screen is exactly what the picture is going to look like. When you take a picture, what you see will be exactly what you saw the moment before you took the picture. In fact, I did a whole 3-part series on exposure with mirrorless cameras. You can find the first of those right here. So when I'm shooting with my X Series cameras, I'm generally shooting in aperture priority, and then I use the exposure compensation dial to increase or decrease the exposure of the image looking at what I'm seeing. So if it looks too bright, I darken it with the dial, and vice versa. If it's too dark, I brighten it with the dial. And I have a histogram here that can show me, oh, I've got some highlights that are clipping, I'll probably need to dial that down a little bit. Because the screen might not show you everything. It might not show you those extreme highlight clips that might not be able to be recorded properly by the sensor. So between the EV dial and the histogram, I basically just look at the screen, make adjustments, and go. So there's no mystery. What you see is what you get. Number 10, bracketing. The X Series cameras allow you to do a number of different bracketing functions. And to do that, you turn the drive dial to bracket, or if you have a drive button, you press that and scroll down to bracket. And once you're there, you can choose between exposure, ISO, white balance, film simulation, and focus bracketing. So you've got 5 different choices. So for each of those options, you can choose a number of different parameters for how that's set up. For example, film sim bracketing, you choose 3 different film sims. So when you take the picture, it'll give you the same picture but with 3 different film sims. Same thing for exposure bracketing, for white balance bracketing. Again, I tend not to bracket very much because of the whole what you see is what you get thing. I can make adjustments and see how it's going to look like in the camera. The film sim bracketing is nice though, because you get the same frame with 3 different film sim options. If you're shooting a fast breaking scene, there's no way you'd be able to shoot, adjust, shoot, adjust, shoot, adjust your film sims 3 times to get that scene. And the focus bracketing option allows you to create those focus stacking images because you'll take a number of frames in slices and then you can later bring those into a photo editing program and put those all together to have this sharp photo front to back or have just a vastly increased depth of field in your image. Did a whole video about that, which you can find right here. Okay, number 11. Hey, wait a minute, I thought we were just going to do 10 tips today. Well, this video goes to 11. And number 11 is the FUJIFILM app. Now I know not everyone loves the FUJIFILM app. I know that people have trouble with it. Some people have had horrible problems with it. The older FUJIFILM Cam Remote app has been replaced by the FUJIFILM X app. And it's way more stable and there's a whole lot of different functions and features that weren't in the older app. And so for example, I use it for remote control. So I shoot all my videos using the phone as my remote control to stop and start the video in between takes. But I could also use the app to download firmware to a specific camera that you've got connected. You can back up or store settings. You can also download pictures onto the phone or your tablet. It works on the iPad as well. Probably Android, I'm not sure, not an Android guy. You've got this whole pane where you can see for any camera how many frames you've shot through it and which lenses, how many frames with each of these different lenses you've shot, how many frames with each film sim. And so it's just kind of a cool way to track what's going on. By far the 2 most useful things are the remote control and the download picture feature. Oh, and the firmware. You can update firmware right from the phone to your camera. You don't have to do the card anymore. And the remote control is really cool because you can actually shoot through the phone. You can see the scene that you're shooting. You can tap to focus. You can change all of the camera parameters right from the phone, exposure, white balance, film sim, all this other stuff, and tap to focus, tap to shoot. So you can have the camera on a tripod somewhere else, and if it's within Bluetooth range, you can control it entirely with the phone. And that's pretty cool because think about all the options for that. You could have the camera up on the basketball goal and just be there right off court going tap, 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 tap. So yeah, sports and action that could be cool for remote cameras, racing, wildlife. There's tons of options here. So I encourage you to get connected. Get the FUJIFILM X app and try it out. One slight hitch is that if you've never used the FUJIFILM X app, you'll need to update the camera's firmware to the latest version, which is compatible, then you can connect right through the phone. Okay, that's all for now. So I just gave you 11 solid tips, plus all those sub-tips within the other tips that can help you increase your understanding and your efficiency and your creative options with the FUJIFILM cameras. There's so much you can do with these little creative machines, and it just takes going out with your camera, having fun, shooting photos, and seeing what's possible. And of course, for even more tips, I've got my best-selling ebook, X Series Unlimited, which is 350 plus pages of tips and advice and all the settings, basically everything you need to know in order to have the most fun and get the best performance from your FUJIFILM camera. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. Please leave a comment, please subscribe to my channel, please tell all your friends about my channel. You can find me on social media and Patreon at Dan Bailey Photo. You can visit my blog and website as well. So take care, have fun with your Fujis out there, and I'll see you next time.